attendees, welcome to the session. And it is my pleasure to introduce Professor Niels. Professor Niels Van Quaquebeke, I'm sorry if I haven't pronounced it correctly, is Professor of Leadership and Organizational Behavior and the Head of Department of Leadership and Management at the KLU. He is additionally affiliated with the University of Exeter as a distinguished research professor. Professor Niels is a psychologist by training. He pursued his PhD at the University of Hamburg and as a visiting scholar at various business schools around the globe. If I read his entire CV, I will be only talking about him for the whole hour. So I'm just going to do a very quick overview. As all of you might have guessed, his research focuses on the issues of leadership and he explores the communicative basis of successful leadership, the importance of values, ways of leading ethically, and the function of interpersonal respect, something that I think really makes sense for all of us to think about in the current context. He's also he used to be the senior associate editor of the Leadership Quarterly, where he still continues to serve as a member of the editorial board, as well as for Organizational Behavior and Human Decision Processes and Journal of Occupational and Organizational Psychology, all three very good journals. His recent research on respectful inquiry as a leadership tool has received the biennial Innovation Award by the IO chapter of the German Psychological Association. And his work, this is the one piece of work that, in my, as we were talking, is very, very exciting and very interesting. Today, Professor Niels is going to talk to us about a piece that he wrote and which caught my attention, which is Your Bot Boss. Yeah, we all now chat, anytime you go on a e-commerce site or a bank site today, the bot starts to take over. But I think he's thinking of a future where the bot becomes your boss. And he's going to explore the question, how AI will take over and change leadership as we know it. So Professor Niels, thank you for agreeing to do this. We're all looking forward to listening to this. And this is just for the audience. If you have questions, please put it in the question and answer, and we will read out the questions to Professor Niels once he's finished with his talk. I hope that's the format that you'd like to follow, Professor Niels. Yeah. Okay.
Sounds
so
good.
Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Niharika, for the very kind introduction. That was a lot of stuff about me, so let's see that the rest of the seminar is more about content that actually interests you, not my CV details. And also because I assume many scholars are listening, maybe also a little bit of a backstory to what I will be talking to you about. This paper eventually got published in JLOS, and it's called The Now New Next of Digital Leadership. And from that, I'm going to take a deep dive into something more specific, which is really the next, not the now and the new. But for the scholars in the room, I want to relay a story. And that is, we had tried to submit that paper already 3 or 4 years ago. And you can imagine what happened 3 or 4 years ago. People came back to us telling us, all the editors, many of them technologically versed, they said, no, this is science fiction. This will never happen. And it was only when there was the actual advent of OpenAI with their first more public-facing ChatGPT that ultimately editors started to see, okay, there's really something happening in that sphere. So if you're working on frontier topics, don't be dismayed. It's not always that the editors get it, even if it's being submitted from other people where you supposedly think they should get it. Just stick with it, be persistent, and I think a little bit of foresight is good for our discipline, but it doesn't come easy for our discipline. All right, with that, let me take you on a deep dive on what I want to talk to you about today. So as already introduced, I'm a psychologist and a leadership researcher. And I've come to believe over the last years that maybe leadership, human leadership, ought to be executed by machines, because maybe it's not a bad thing. And I get it. This is a very controversial thesis, So, as you would do in such a talk, so obviously there is a need to back this up, and this is what I'm going to try to talk to you about now. I'm trying to back up that claim, and at the end of my talk, you have to see, you be the judge whether you're convinced by what I have to say. Okay, so my journey into this started about 6 years ago. I've always been a techie. I've worked in the tech industry for quite a while. And 6 years ago, I had the opportunity to visit factory of Hugo Boss in Izmir, Turkey. Now, that factory they had converted to a digital first factory. What that included meant, they had the digital twin and all these things that you would have with modern digital factories. But what they had also done was that they had substituted all lower and middle level management for algorithmic management. What that meant in concrete terms was when the workers came in the morning, they received their little tablets, and on the tablets it was indicated which stations they had to go to, which charges to work with, the productivity quota, and so on. And so they started to move to these stations and work away. And then as the day progressed, on their screens, they saw their own productivity and the bonus that they would be getting for the day, because it would be that type of labor where you get paid for actual performance. And then in the middle of the workshops, they had these huge LCD screens, and on them were displayed sacks that slowly filled with gold. And they were indicating the team bonus. Because as you can imagine with Hugo Boss, right, they produce these suits. So you have the arm, you have the chest, you have the back, and they're all being sewn together at different stations. Now these need to work together, and Hugo Boss wanted to incentivize really great teamwork. So they gave everybody a team bonus, and in the middle of the workshop, there was a sack of gold that slowly filled up as people were getting their team bonus. So now imagine me coming from Hamburg, Germany, into that factory. It was hot, it was loud, and I saw the humans toiling away at machines, being told by other machines what to do. And I thought, holy smokes, we've created our nightmare. We actually have become the machines, we've become the executors. And I was dismayed, but I was there on a research trip. So, together with a translator, I picked out randomly people from the factory workers. I started interviewing them. And one by one, they told me, no, Niels, this is actually great. We love it. I'm like, what? Explain this to me. And they were all like, you need to understand the comparison standard. You might have in your head these lofty models of what great leadership can be, but our reality was that I needed to brown nose the foreman every morning or every week in order to get allocated to the better station, because there were better stations and worse stations. Now we have a fair allocation mechanism. In the past, I needed to hurry throughout the workshop floor if my machine broke down, somehow getting somebody to bring a replacement part and fix the machine. Now I can just insert it on my tablet, and there are service personnel that will automatically fix it. In the past, I did not understand where my bonus was coming from, because sure, I know I work better or worse, but I got my bonus at the end of the month and couldn't really connect it to what I was doing any given day. And most importantly, in the past, we didn't identify as a team. So in the past, it didn't matter whether a machine broke down or not. But now we see it with our sack of gold, and we see suddenly our sack of gold is not growing. So we look around, and who do we see? Yeah, Rika, obviously, it's always her. Her machine broke down. So what we do, instead of screaming at her, we go over and we're like, all right, let's try to fix your machine together, because the sack of gold for us all depends on that. And suddenly they had more of a team spirit. And they said, Niels, in comparison, the new system is a lot better. And that got me thinking. First of all, it got me thinking about our comparison benchmarks that we often apply from academia. We think, oh, this is how it should be, and then we compare everything with that. But obviously, that's not the reality out there. And then in subsequent years, it got me thinking, man, that was algorithmic management. That was 6 years ago. Since then, we've seen a Cambrian explosion in technology, in particular in AI technology. Now, if we think about algorithmic management, that's pretty simple. That's routinized, standardized, if-then types of rules, right? That's easy to program. But since then, we've seen generative AI and what they can do. So I started to muse a little bit about, okay, what does that mean then actually not just for management, with routinized tasks, but for leadership. And when I say leadership, I mean true people leadership. And for me as a psychologist, what is core in that equation is often human motivation. And so let me try now to convince you over the remainder of this talk that the new types of Gen AIs are actually possible to cater to our human motivation. And to that, I want to take you into a theory, or first explain a theory that is necessary for my explanations. That's self-determination theory. Some of you will know it. It's a big 10 theory that has various sub-theories to it. And one of these sub-theories concerns itself with basic psychological needs. It posits that all humans, wherever they've grown up or are born, have three basic psychological needs: for autonomy, for competence, and relatedness. If these needs are thwarted, we don't feel good, neither in health nor in our motivation. But if these needs are satisfied for us, we feel good. We feel something which is called self-determination, and we would show something which generally people would refer to as intrinsic motivation. So one could argue that for many modern industries, that's actually the pinnacle of what we want to reach. We want to have these self-starting, proactive, intrinsically motivated people. So let's put AI to the test. Could it actually cater to these types of basic psychological needs? And let's start with a competence need. Now, the competence need refers to our need to feel that we're mastering something, either that we're growing into it, so we're becoming better, or that we are already a master and competent in something. And here I would venture out to say that many of you are already being led by a machine, because many of you will track your steps, either by a smartwatch or something else, a Fitbit or Apple Watch or whatever. And not just your steps, but some of you maybe also your training. So what do? You set a goal together with a machine and you say, today I want to reach 10,000 steps, or today I want to have my pulse at above 130 for 30 minutes. So you set a goal together with a machine. The machine, much like a leader, monitors you. And then the machine celebrates together with you once you reach your goals. And in between, it tries to cheerlead you on. It's like, come on, another 2,000 steps, you can do it, or keep with it. And in the end, it celebrates together with you by giving you a badge. Here's your platinum badge. You've reached the next level, or you've closed your rings. Hooray! And you feel the vibrations on your arm. So we're already doing this. So when I talk about leadership, I don't necessarily mean that you're going to have in the future a robot in front of you who tells you what to do. I'm talking about this type of deep integration where you don't actually know that you're being led. It doesn't feel like leadership. Let me outline this, how this might look at work. So at work, very likely we're going to walk into a future where bigger strategic objectives, which are also co-produced likely with a multi-agent AI system. We're already seeing the research on this, and they perform quite well. So these types of strategic objectives will be broken down for you into certain tasks. And these tasks will be matched for you based on your competence profile. When I say that, it's not just, the CV that you handed into your company and the grades, but rather the AI can scan the complete corpus of your corporate communication. And from that, it can discern your personality, your motives, how diligent you are in working, what are the topics you engage with more. And that's already possible today. So it fits for you the tasks that actually work well with your competence. That's already feeling good for you in terms of working on stuff that you're good at. And you're going to get a suggestion, and you can pick from that suggestion the task that you want to work on. And you can pick on the ones that you feel are best also for your growth, which additionally is going to feel good for your competence profile. And then in that future, and by the way, that's not the future, that's already now. And in that scenario, you're not going to be alone with that work anymore. Because let's imagine one of these tasks is like, please, imagine you're at Tata and your manager asks you, or your AI asks you in the task, please write a memo on what we're going to do with the new imposed tariffs by the US government and how this will impact Tata imports and exports and the wider automotive sector in Southeast Asia. What do we all do already today? Nobody of us starts at a blank page of paper, at least if you're not stupid, right? We all go to ChatGPT and say, hey, what are the points to consider here? Can you write a first draft? What is data that you need? Maybe we then plug in the data that we have. Can you make sense of that? What would be the extrapolations if we have a 25% tariff? So you never start on a blank page again. And that is the biggest obstacle for most of us. The first step, like in training and sports, is this first step. But the first step is now being taken over by an assistant. So that's already going to feel good for our competence. And then we can hone that a little bit. Now, additionally, you now have somebody else you can spar with. All your crazy ideas that you usually cannot go to your colleagues with. So, usually I have very crazy ideas and I go to Pooja and I say, hey, Pooja, what do you think of this? Pooja is like, oh, not Niels again. He always has those crazy ideas. So she doesn't entertain my thoughts. But with ChatGPT, I can say, hey, what do you think of this? And ChatGPT is going to say, interesting idea. Let's explore this. And by the way, you can do this today. It always says, interesting idea, let's explore it. And it's going to feel good. And you have somebody to actually spar with you, not somebody who only wants to drink coffee with you, but somebody who actually is good as a conversation partner, very competent and not judgy, which is nice. So now you will ask, does that lead anywhere? Do we actually have performance increments? Yes, we do see massive performance increments. In the last year, there was a seminal study. It was great, conducted by some colleagues in the U.S., amongst them Wharton and Harvard and so on. And they did they did a field experiment at BCG, Boston Consulting Group, and half of the consultants they gave ChatGPT 3.5. Back then, that was the version. The other half, they didn't give anything to. The experimental group, they told, hey, use as much as you can for all your tasks and see what it does. And then a couple of weeks later, they came back and assessed what had happened. It turns out that people were 12% more productive, 25% faster. By the way, if you put these two numbers together, you already see that people are faster, but it doesn't necessarily end up in productivity. They probably also use it for leisure time. But the kicker of that study is the results were judged, the quality of the results, 40% better. And these are BCG consultants. I mean, this is not somebody stupid who really got upgraded. These are already top of the crop, also from our graduates. So this is pretty amazing. And just a recent study has come out with Ethan Mollick and some other people, a huge field experiment again at Procter & Gamble, and they find similar results. So we do see performance increments. And we also feel it. We are getting better. Everybody that's engaging with Gen AI, we know we're getting more productive, better in what we're doing. So in terms of our competence need, that's going to feel pretty good. But the future won't stop there. The future will be adaptive. Same as your running app. If you have like a Garmin or whatever that monitors your heart rate, it monitors you actively and then adapts the training that it suggests to you. For instance, it's going to say, Shivata, you're running too fast. Slow down a little bit. Or now you could run a little bit faster. It is very adaptive to keep you in that certain optimal state where you are training the best. Now at work, we can expect something similar. That tasks are going to be suggested to you that do not overextend you so that you're in the state of anxiety and panic, but at the same time do not under-challenge you so that you're in the state of apathy and boredom. Instead, they will keep you in that optimal zone of what we call flow. And with every work you do, with every work that you submit, it learns what you're good, where you're struggling, and it can suggest these tasks to you. Same as with your running apps, you're going to get better. You know this from your running apps. You're getting better in sports. The same will happen at work, that you ultimately realize, man, I'm getting better. It's like having a personal mentor and coach at your side. In terms of our competence needs, that's a full check mark on that one. So let's move on to the next one, which is autonomy. The autonomy need refers to our human need to feel in control, to be the masters of our own fate. Because why would we show motivation if we don't feel in control of our lives? Now, to feel in control, you need essentially two things. One is you do need the decision freedom, and the other part is you do need an understanding of your surrounding, because decision freedom doesn't do anything if you don't actually understand what you're deciding upon and where you're making your choices. So I've already alluded to it in my previous section that an AI is very likely not going to dictate tasks to you. Instead, it's going to make suggestions and it can very quickly adapt. If you say, no, give me new tasks, it's going to generate 10 new tasks for you. And that's going to feel very good for your decision autonomy. It can adapt much more than so than humans. But even in context where decision freedom is not really an option, think back to the workers of the factory at Hugo Boss. I mean, they can't go there and say, oh, today I don't want to work at that machine. They got to work at these machines. Then the other factor comes in, which is understanding of the context. And here, I think LLMs or any type of Gen AI, but in particular, LLMs have a huge underappreciated potential. And that is make the world around us more understandable for us in a way that we actually understand it. We can feed corporate LLMs with all the material that we have in the corporation, and it can digest it and then give it back to us in a way that we understand it. Let me make this clear by way of a profession that is notoriously hard to understand, at least in Germany: medical doctors. You go to a medical doctor, they usually tell you something, and you're like, if you're like me, you get your blood scans or whatever, you listen, you're very obedient in the room, and then you go home and you Google everything because you only understood 30% of it. And the way that the doctor also has written it up, it doesn't make any sense to you. So researchers, what they've done is they've taken a study, or what they've done is they went on Reddit. Reddit is this big communication platform where people comment and ask questions, and they have different subthreads for everything. They have these medical questions where people ask medical questions. And the researchers went in there, crawled all these medical questions, and then crawled the answers that were given by a human physician, self-identified human physician. And they assessed, and I will say something on the assessment later. Anyway, they had the human question and the human generated answer by a self-identified physician. And then they took the same question and they had an LLM provide the answer to that question. And then they gave an independent panel of healthcare professionals, so people that work in healthcare insurances, policymakers, and so on. They gave the question and they gave both answers to, and they didn't disclose which one was human or AI, and they just asked which one is the better one. Well, you can already guess it. The one that was generated by AI was deemed much better than the ones generated by humans. And interestingly, it was not just because the diagnosis was a little bit more nuanced, but it was because it was more understandable. And that is crucial. Anybody that teaches also in hospitals knows that for compliance, for patient compliance, what is crucial is that people understand what the doctor is saying. Essentially, that's the same thing we're trying to teach at business schools. In order to get compliance, so followership, you as a leader need to make people abundantly clear what is the situation and what is expected of them, and they need to understand it. So this medical experiment showed it quite well. Now, in a work setting, um, this is going to be pretty similar. You upload, as I said, you upload all the documents into that LLM, and then you query it with all types of questions that you have. And if you don't understand the questions, if you don't understand the answers, you can simply ask the GPT to say, "Hey, can you write it up for me like I'm a 6-year-old? Can you write it up for me like I'm a 10-year-old?" And if you're like me, you probably stop at 16-year-old, and that's the level of sophistication that you can handle. But maybe for the first time ever in your life, you will start to understand the strategy 2030 that your company has, because you can strip it of all that nonsense and jargon and so on and make it relatable for yourself. So finally, the surroundings start to make sense for you. And that is incredibly important. Now, some of you might say, well, we also have this in companies, right? You have an open door policy and people can come in and I will explain to them anything if they ask me. I say, yeah, sure, dear managers, that is true. But let's also be honest here. You're very busy because that's your job. You're a manager. So open door policy works if you're in, but most of the time you're actually not in. So I go by your office, you're not in. Next time I go by your office, you're in, but you're talking to somebody. Third time I go by your office, you're in, there's nobody there. I'm going to take a seat. And now I start thinking, man, can I now ask you to explain it to me like I'm a 6-year-old? Probably not, because it will make me look ridiculous. Additionally, I might have concerns that with some of my questions, um, step over red tape, or some implicit things that I should better not query about. So we often self-censor ourselves in human interactions, which leads to a limited understanding of our surrounding. Now, with an AI, you don't have that. We're going to feel pretty empowered because we start to understand our surroundings and we can make more informed choices. And for our autonomy need, that is exactly what we want. So let's also put a check mark on the autonomy need. Which brings me to the last need, the relatedness need. Now, our relatedness need refers to our desire to feel connected to others, something bigger, a group, usually a group of humans, or a purpose. And I don't know how things are in India, but if you look at many of the Western companies, we see for the last 2 decades already a steady decline in what we call organizational identification. And the COVID pandemic hasn't helped because now people are in remote setups and it's harder to identify when everything is more abstract. So it's not like, in terms of the relatedness need, things are going all that great in the human world. But let's see whether we can rectify it. And to that end, again, an experiment. This is not published yet. What they've done is so this is what was with executives in the US. They taught an LLM with all the rules of charismatic and inclusive speech and transformational speech. So all the rules that we have and all the corpuses of text to write good speeches. And they also taught a class or multiple classes of executives the same things to some extent. And then they asked the LLM to write a rousing, inclusive speech, and they asked the senior executives to write rousing and inclusive speeches. And then they had an independent audience rate the two speeches. So both speeches were read by an actor, and they had to rate which one they found more appealing. Lo and behold, the ones by an LLM, which is, of course, makes sense. I mean, these senior executives, no matter how much experience they have, they cannot possibly internalize all the knowledge that we have from science, how to write good speeches and so on. They're still humans and have their quirks. An LLM can write a very nice, inclusive, great rousing speech. And many of us have made the experience, if you've been maid of honor or best man, I think many of us also are using now our LLMs to write those speeches or Christmas dinners and so on. And it makes sense because at least the first draft is a lot better. But granted, not all of management or leadership is about these grand speeches. We have many more smaller speech acts, like in the hallway. And here, let me come back to that Reddit study. If you still remember, medical questions answered by a human, answered by an LLM. Now, they did not only rate how good the quality of the answer was, but they also rated the empathy of the answer. And here's the kicker. The answer that was written by a GPT was deemed as more empathetic than that written by humans. And yeah, I get it. Some of you will now say, well, this is Reddit, this is in forums, you have very curtailed conversation. I say, yeah, sure. But that is the truth of our human interaction in any context. You meet people somewhere in the hallway, you're not going to stand around for 2 hours and explain everything to them or be empathetic. You're in your own world. Your cat died this morning. Maybe additionally your hamster died as well. You didn't have lunch to eat. So you're grumpy. You're very much concerned with yourself and you're very curt with other people. We pretend like human interaction is this nice thing happening all the time. And I don't know. Here I'm going to weigh in with another study because some of you might also say, yeah, this is one-off interactions. True leadership is about repeated interactions. Yeah, sure. So there's another study that came out at the beginning of this year. This was done on a chatbot called Replica AI. Replica AI is a chatbot that you can style, not only the way that it looks, but also in the tonality that it talks to you and the types of subjects it would talk to you about. And they've taken a group of people that were mildly depressed, and they had them subject to that chatbot, and then just wanted to see how people feel. Now, the first result of that study was that people reported afterwards feeling less lonely. By the way, I should put a disclaimer here because last week there was another study that just came out that actually reports sometimes people feel more lonely, but there are lots of conditions for that. Anyway, in that study, people reported feeling less lonely. But the most important thing of that study was that the people reported that after interacting with a chatbot, they finally felt more ready again to interact with other humans. Let that sink in. Interactions with other machines fill up our batteries in such a way that we then say, all right, now I'm ready for the harsh human reality again. And I think that captures also my reality much better. I don't think human interactions are, on average, always that nice. Many of them are characterized by mutual ignorance or neglect, some of them by dominance and status plays or outright aggression, and the fewest of them of by respect and kindness and so on. So I think human interactions, especially for those of us who are also a little bit more introverted, they're difficult. They're energy draining a lot of the times. An AI doesn't have that. An AI can stay with you and your topics. It doesn't need to talk about itself. If your hamster died, it's going to stay with you on topic. It's going to notice and it's going to say, oh, uh, Kitty, Kitty, I see that you're jumping back and forth between Instagram and LinkedIn today a lot. This is not your usual pattern. What is going on? And Kitty might say, oh, my hamster died. And then the LLM is going to say, oh, your hamster, its name was Charles, right? Oh, I still remember when you got it. A human will not remember the name of your hamster or when you got it. And immediately you're going to feel more connected to that LLM. And then it's going to say, hey, should I cheer you up? And it's going to tell you some jokes or engage you with trivia, like how many Eiffel Towers does it need to get from Earth to Moon? And it's going to feel good. You're going to feel seen and understood and like you have space. You're being listened to. And we all know that that is the essence of any good relationship. In fact, that's what also makes people fall in love with other people. If you feel you can be yourself and you have the space to be yourself. So I get it. Now, the next critics in the room will say, yeah, that's all interesting, Niels, but human interactions are, they have so many more levels. It's not just written, it's actually voice interactions. We have the nonverbal communication and so on. There's so much more for human connection. And to those, I want to outline some trends. First of all, you've all seen this over the last half year. Almost any of the major frontier models are getting voice modules right now. And if any of you have played around with those voice modules, they feel eerily real in the way how they talk to you. They have the pauses in them, they have the ums and ahs. It's a great conversation partner. In fact, I put ChatGPT on our dinner table, and my kids ask me, Louis XIV and mercantilism. Dad, can you tell us something about it? I'm like, no, I have no idea anymore. But let's ask ChatGPT, and we have a regular conversation at the dinner table. So that's one of the big trends that the voice modules, we're going to have natural language interaction with these machines. This stupid typing is hopefully soon a technology of the past. The other parts, and these are real mega trends, is we see a mega trend towards remote work in many parts of the world, even though some companies try to dial it back. But I think also the way with population development and such, I think we're going to see some more remote trends. And as part of that remote trend, interconnected, we see another trend, which is virtualization. And with virtualization, I don't mean this stuff that we have here. This is also an intermediary technology where we have each other on video screens, but more immersive virtual reality, where I have an Apple iVision Pro or Meta Quest or whatever, and it scans my face and I get an avatar. There's a digital representation, and we're going to meet in that room. Now, in that room, my avatar is indistinguishable from my digital twin's avatar because we're both digital. It's all pixels, no matter how realistic those pixels seem. And by the way, if you looked at softwares like Synthesia or other things, we can make hyper-realistic human-looking avatars. So you're not going to know in the future whether you're actually interacting with an AI or with a human, because in the virtual world, we're all going to look the same. And now I ask you, who would you rather interact with? With me, the real human in flesh and blood, but in the digital representation, or my digital twin? You don't have to answer because I know the answer. The answer is you're going to like to interact more with my digital twin because the digital twin is actually, he doesn't want to talk about himself. He's going to listen to you a lot more. He's going to remember your hamster's names. He's going to know a lot more jokes than I know. And so it makes a lot more sense for you. It's a lot more fun to hang out with my digital twin. And same as many of us have experienced it when we were young, there were the Tamagotchis. Now what we have with AI are basically Tamagotchis on steroids, right there. And there will be this tendency that we see human qualities in them. And it's very hard not to see them, not with the technology we're experiencing today, with the voice modules, with the types of representation. Bring in robotics to this, and it gets super real. So you're seeing where I'm getting with this. We've now touched on all three needs: competence, autonomy, and relatedness. And on relatedness, I also want to make a check mark because I've just outlined that you're going to feel seen, empathetic, you're going to feel connected to these. So there's huge potential for our human motivation at work in our interaction with machines. Now, I say this and I fully want to acknowledge the risks. There are many risks, garbage in, garbage out. So right now, the LLMs don't have a physical interaction with the world. They're trained on data, written data mostly, or visual data. That data is biased, and so they will also reproduce some of these biases, whatever bias means, right? That's also a big debate. But we need to work on it, and people are working on it. There's another risk I see. If our human communication loses its fidelity because I don't know anymore whether Niharika actually wrote me the email or whether the AI wrote the email or whether that's actually Niharika here in the Zoom meeting or she just sent her digital twin in the Zoom meeting. Our human communication loses its fidelity, so we start to not trust communication anymore. And yet we as a species crucially rely on communication as the fundament for our cooperation. So once we lose trust, we lose cooperation potential. So all companies need to do something there, how to ensure the fidelity of our communication. And last, one of the bigger risks I also see is unleashing AI so that we have an super capitalist AI running companies. Think Amazon on steroids. You really calculate, okay, how much churn can I allow? How much can I squeeze my workers? And so what is the maximum capital gains I can generate? And that will lead to a dystopia for most of us humans. So there are these topics and many more, and we have a thriving community of academics working on these. Unfortunately, I think not fast enough for some of the paradigm shifts that are coming our way. But that's not what I want to talk about today. Today, I want to talk about AI actually being an enabler in leadership. And they can overcome a bottleneck that we currently have. And the bottleneck that we currently have are the humans, the human managers. And I say this with all love for human managers. I've had them in my seminars for more than 20 years, and they don't come into my seminars and say, Niels, show me how to manipulate my people so I can squeeze the maximum out of it. None of them are assholes. All of them are humans that want to do right by their people. So it's not them and their mindset or motives, but they're strapped for resources. They often don't have the skill as a resource, but more often than that, they don't have the time as a resource to sit down with each one of you and entertain your crazy ideas or listen to your stories about your hamster or remember all the names of your children and so on. They simply don't have the time for it. There is a bottleneck there. AI sitting on our computers, being with us all in all parts of our life, they don't have that bottleneck restraint. They have all the resources. And as I've just outlined, with these resources, they can satisfy our basic psychological needs for competence, autonomy, and relatedness. And with that, they have the potential to bring out the very best in us. And isn't that what leadership is actually about? So, you find me here as an organizational psychologist with a lot of love for humans, but also a technological mind who says if we think this through, maybe being led by machines isn't that much worse than being led by humans. And I want to put one final remark coming back to the beginning. In our discussion, let's keep the comparison fair, same as the workers at the factory of Hugo Boss. The comparison standard we ought to take here is that of the average human manager. Granted, we're going to have great human managers, but these are an exception. And maybe against the greatest of human managers and leaders, the AI will not outperform them. But against most of the average or sub-average managers, I think AI can do a pretty good job. All right, now I'm happy to go into the discussion, and I hope I've rubbed many of you in the wrong way so that we can have a controversial discussion. Thank you very much. You're muted, Niharika. I see you speaking, but you're muted.
Yes, so thank you again, Neil, for your lovely talk and your argument. Of course, there's a bristle in everybody's mind. Huh? Is it really true? But I can see there are some very interesting questions. So I'll read them out one by one, and then maybe I'll read them, and then you can answer them. One question. This is from a Karan Arora who's asking, doesn't predictability lead to boredom within your workers? Even with increasing difficulty gamification, if things are predictable, then it drops motivation.
Um, yes and no. There is a Goldilocks zone. I think extreme unpredictability undermines our motivation because uh, we humans are ultimately prediction machines. We're trying to hold our surroundings in a way predictable because that ensures our survival. You know, that's very evolution biology. Um, so we try to keep things predictable, and to a certain extent, then predictability is necessary in order for us to feel like we can actually that we're safe, and within that safety unfold part of our potential. But yes, you're right. Certain elements of surprise are often needed for us to develop into something new, to grow somewhere into the unexpected. But having an AI does not mean that you're not going to be surprised by the things that it's going to throw your way. Because already, if you think about it, a multi-agent AI system coming up with a strategy likely is going to come up, depending on the different data you're going to feed to it, it's going to come up with very different tasks for you to work on. So that, to a certain extent, will always create new challenges for you. And with these new challenges, I think you're going to be um, sufficiently motivated to conquer them again.
Hmm. Okay, interesting. There's also a question by Mohit Taneja who says, what about accountability of AI leadership?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I also have other pieces where I muse about what is the role of human leaders in that future. And I think the role of human leadership in the future is to lead the machines that are leading other humans. We're going to see an upper echelon of leaders within companies, but also on the state side, who will need to take responsibility for basically broader civilization developments. And part of these responsibilities include ethics. How, and this is not easy to answer because, as I've just said, ethics is a plural. There is not one right perspective unless you follow a certain ethic like utilitarianism or deontologism or whatever. There is a plethora of different perspectives, and so far we haven't figured out what we're going to decide on. And this is one of the big obstacles, for instance, for autonomous driving. Autonomous driving, one of the big obstacles is the trolley problem. Some of you might know this. You're standing on a train track. There's a train coming, and if it continues the way that it's supposed to go, it's going to go and kill 5 people. But if you hit the switch, it's going to divert its course and it's going to go and kill 1 person. What are you going to do? And very different perspectives. Utilitarianism, you need to save the most. The ontology would be no, each individual has its own right. Now, we can muse about this, and philosophers have for many centuries, but what do we do with an autonomous driving vehicle? Because it needs to follow a rule. So right now, I think they're contemplating actually putting a randomizer in there, sometimes following that rule, sometimes that rule. And we need people in charge who take these types of dilemmas very seriously, because essentially leadership is about navigating dilemmas. If it's just about solving problems, not leadership, it's solving a problem. Dilemmas means you have different options of almost equal value and you need to go left or right. And that's the hard part of leadership. And we need people who take responsibility for that. And also with a given foresight, not just managing the processes and the efficiencies, but also understanding what that means for civilization in 10 years, in 50 years, in 100 years. And they need to become stewards, basically understanding going back to Uncle Ben from Spider-Man, who says, with great power comes great responsibility, understanding the responsibility. What I do think then is necessary is first of all, a good understanding of ethics and civilization development. The other part is critical thinking. It's really questioning everything because these models are very persuasive, and if you don't understand how they come up with certain things, you just buy all the gibberish. And the third part is they need to become curators of data or curators of learning, because these machines are basically like our children. We raise them, and the way how we raise them is going to determine how they will interact with humanity in the future. If we're not careful in the way we raise them and the types of experiences, and here this is the metaphor for data, and the type of data we subject them to, we're going to turn out children that can wreak havoc on the world and create a dystopia that we don't want. So we need to be very careful with these children, with this new species we're creating there.
Thank you. There are a couple of questions which are related, so I'm just going to put them together. There is somebody who's asked the question, will it replace human leaders altogether? And do you see job losses in the future because of what we're saying?
This is a very good question. First of all, I think for the time being, we want to have humans in the loop because there is not enough reliability in some of these systems. But we shouldn't be naive. We always think a human in the loop ensures that everything is going to be better. That is not true. Humans do a lot of mistakes. We're very biased ourselves. Humans do not ensure better quality of the outcome. So we shouldn't kid ourselves. But for the time being, I think it needs good humans in the loop, in particular in leadership positions. In the future, I'm not sure. I said there's probably going to be an upper echelon of people who oversee this. Beyond that, I'm not sure. Which begs the big question, and this is the elephant in the room. I have a different keynote on that one. I already told you before. The big elephant in the room is we in our meritocratic societies are being rewarded and acknowledged in status for providing good answers. These answers can be of the cognitive nature, knowledge nature, creative nature, but this is basically what we reward. And this is what all our school and other institutional systems groom us for, providing good answers. What's going to be our role in a world where machines can provide these answers? Much better, more comprehensive, easier to understand, more personalized than we can. Why should I pay you to provide an answer that can be better and cheaper provided by a machine? And yes, if we do have a candid conversation with each other, there's no need to pay you then, only for the machine, because the machine gives it to me better and at a cheaper price. That begs the question, what do we do with humans in that world? And sure, there is the standard answer that, a lot of us might have to go into more physical operating professions again, so handyman, caretaking professions, and so on. And yeah, to the extent that robotic is not going to completely claim that, or at least that robotics is too expensive to take that over, and that humans are still less expensive than robots doing carpentry work or caretaking work, that will work. I think for me, the bigger paradigm shift that we need to urgently get on as a society is to shift from us as humans self-construing ourselves as being able to give better answers to those being the ones asking great questions. I think it is, from everything I see in the development, the only thing that I can currently see that differentiates us from the machines is our human curiosity and drive to understand things. To some extent, so you can program it into machines, but again, it starts with some curiosity. If we can hone, if we can get on a paradigm shift as a civilization to all become better in asking good questions, and we celebrate each other for the questions we ask, That I think makes sense because answers are going to be available in abundance. But the good questions are going to be rare, and it's going to be the great questions that are going to propel us forward as a civilization.
Mhm.
I think it's only then that we have a chance. There are other things we need to consider, like um, the distribution of value. You know, if you don't have a job, or you know, how what are you going to earn money for? Or how are you going to stay a consumer, and so on? And if all the value is actually reaped by machines that ultimately are only taxed in the U.S. or in China, then we also have all an issue for our livelihood. So I think that's more of an economic or taxing questions. But from a psychological point of view and civilization, I think, yeah, we're entering a stage, I think where we need to re-embrace our sense of wonder with the world and sense of curiosity and really become great in asking good questions. And then I think what we can unlock can be phenomenal. And we see it already. We see, for instance, in the medical industry that suddenly with AlphaFold and similar technologies that a lot more antibiotics are being discovered right now. We thought we were at the end. We're not at the end anymore. A lot more proteins and so on. It's incredible what we can now discover, but it needs those that ask those questions. And I think
Mhm.
if all of humanity were starting to do that, just imagine the the civilization jump we could ultimately do. So I think that's my answer, but it's no easy feat. And it's
Yes.
going to be very painful in the next years, the shifts that we're going to see, in particular in the knowledge and creative industry, including, by the way, our own little universe of education. I think
Yes.
education, if you look at Khan Academy, for instance, Khan has the Khan Migo, which is an AI that works there, very personalized, great stuff. I think luckily students want human interactions, and we also have real interactions that we can then bring into the classroom. But the type of classroom lecturing, that time is completely over. It should have been already over 10 years ago with the advent of the internet, but some of us have been sleeping under a rock and we didn't want to wake up. And now is the time to wake up. All of us need to flip our classrooms. The reading, the understanding is to be done at home, and classroom interaction is something that people can only get from a classroom with human interaction. Otherwise, you do not have a legitimacy anymore to be in the classroom, in my opinion.
Sure, sure. So right, so true. Um, I know we have only 6 minutes, so I'm just going to pick a couple of questions. Here is a very interesting question. Siddharth asks, would it not be too dangerous for one person or extendedly so one machine to know so much about us inside out, to confide so enormously, we all know how it ends up at a human level if the trust is broken. Imagine what can happen if the machine masters decide to cut loose.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think that anybody who's initially the approach was do not release these models onto humanity because that is going to be very hard to rein back in. And then OpenAI just came out, even though Google and other companies had similar models. Um, And yes, it begs the question of oversight. The big tech overlords. Do you want somebody like Elon Musk to be in charge of a large part of humanity and our interactions and experiences that we make? And I think the answer is no. So for most of the ethicists in that domain, the answer is we need a plurality of different AIs, and people need to choose. And it comes with that plurality that we don't have this one tech overlord. I don't know how realistic that is, but we're seeing at least some healthy competition in the space. Let's see how that continues. It begs another question, because you said, Siddhartha, that you subject and confide the AI and your deepest secrets, maybe. That is true. And I think for the time being, that's actually all right. I'm not sure that the machine is going to break your trust. I think it's going to be other humans who govern the machine who might break your trust. But it begs the question, let's say you're at a company and you had this very nice relationship with your personalized AI on your computer, and you work for the company for 5 years. It knows the name of your hamster and your children and knows how you tick. Will you ever change the company? Because now you basically have your best friend at work. And leaving the company would mean leaving the one person behind that truly understands you, the one that you've built a life with for 5 years, as intimate as you haven't done it with anybody before. Who does that data belong to? Can you take it maybe with you to the next company? Can we devise systems that are like, I take my personal leader, AI leader or AI coach with me to the next company? Then you have freedom of mobility. But to the extent that this is going to stay proprietary knowledge, that your company is going to say, no, that's our data, you're going to feel locked in. That suddenly you're going to you're going to leave behind your best friend. And I think that's going to make it very likely for many of us to change our workplaces, which is already hard enough for many of us. So I do think we need to think a little bit further in the developments that are coming there and ensuring that humans retain their autonomy and sense of mobility and freedom to choose, not be locked in by technologies.
So very thoughtful. I think that's a lot of things for all of us to think about. I know there are lots of questions here, but let me just end by kind of a question which is a tongue-in-cheek, written by one person. What about political leadership? Are we better off there as well to have AI?
Uh, yes. But with a caveat, right? AI is something that is human made. So it depends on how we train the AI. Most of the AI now has fairly liberal tendencies. That is because for the last decades, humanity has gravitated more towards liberal ideas, which I think many of us, especially at universities, embrace. If we look at the voting patterns now, we see around the world a backlash that many people do not feel represented by that and have a much more conservative mindset. So the way how an AI is going to govern us depends on the way how it was trained, the material that it was trained on. So yes, I would say AIs can make sounder decisions, but it all depends on how they're being trained. And in the end, that's again the question of the tech overlords in the background that pull the strings, and that's then tough, right? If you say, all right, I put Grok into power, but you know Elon Musk is behind Grok, and suddenly he could tweak what Grok does. I don't think that's the type of authority we want to give away. There are governments around the world that are playing around with this. Singapore is one of them. China is another one of them. Um, they employ AI largely for bureaucratic structures and decision processes, and I think that there it makes a lot of sense. For the bigger decisions, I think it should take an advisory role. One final note, though, on the advisory role. This is what they've seen in the US. Comes from the judicial system in the US. So judges in the US have gotten for some time little machines, prediction machines on the probability of an offender to commit a crime again. So you're standing in front of me as a judge, and then that AI is being fed with all your data, your demographics, and which type and how many offenses you've committed, how you grew up, and so on. It's fed with all that data, and then it spits out a probability of whatever, 91% that you're going to recommit a crime, or 27%. Now, these systems were designed to aid judges in their sentencing as an advice. What the research found is that all of the judges actually followed the advice of the machine. Because as a judge, would you want to be held responsible if a machine suggested there is a recommitting of a crime chance of 91%, but you let that person go? You don't want to be that judge. So you sentence him to a jail sentence. And at the same time, if you feel little bit more generous and the machine suggests, yeah, low probability, you also go along. So we should be careful when we say something is an advice, because we humans are, first of all, convenience creatures. Um, we're also cognitive misers. We don't like to think a lot. And last of all, we'd like to reduce our accountability for difficult decisions. So anytime somebody suggests, like I just did, we should have, for bigger strategic decisions, AI should just give advice. We should, at the same time, always combine it with a caveat. Yes, but ensure in such a way that this is really just advice and people are not just following along. There needs to be, blue team, red team type of thing, or devil's advocate type of system where we really challenge any type of decisions. It's not going to be easy. Hopefully, it's going to make bureaucracy for many of us, also at institutions such as universities, a lot easier. But on the bigger strategic vectors, it's going to come with some significant challenges.
Mm. So what I also hear you say, and I know there are lots of other questions, and as you're saying it, what comes to my mind is that something that is routinized, something that is more um, already structured, maybe the AI, the bot boss is better, but something where there's more discretion involved, and discretion not of, should I reward you or I should not reward you, but discretion in terms of the work itself is uncertain. Maybe you need still the human boss to work with, because we still believe in our superiority.
Yeah, so the distinction that I draw is between solving and deciding.
Right.
Much of the things that we paint as a decision are actually solving problems. And I
Yeah.
think solving problems can be easily given to machines because they are generally better in solving complex problems. And then there are decisions. And for decisions, we can only do something with a certain probability. What I would love in the future when we have such advice systems, that they give us advice, but then they give us a confidence level together with their advice. They say, I suggest this to you, but to be honest, it's a 50-50 chance or a 51-59% chance. Then at least I know, all right, that they're also just bullshitting their way through like any other human. Today, all the machines speak with a confidence that you think they're 100% confident, which obviously they're not in the background. They just
Yeah.
decided on a certain path. And I think that's a way how we can be supported. And
Right.
again, coming back to humans, let's have the comparison fair. Most humans are also not great decision makers. They make a lot of stupid decisions, and unfortunately, some of those people also get into positions of great power,
Right.
and then the whole world has to suffer under that. So it's not like humans are always better.
No, that's true. That's totally true. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I know there are other questions, but we will send them to you just for you to think about,
Thank you.
because they're interesting questions. And I'm sorry, audience, that we didn't have time to listen to all of your questions and for Professor Niels to talk about it. But I now invite Sonali to just do a very quick vote of thanks. Thank you, Professor Niels, and the audience for the conversation. Thank you.
And anybody that is interested in these topics, you can also follow me on LinkedIn. I post a lot on leadership and AI and so on. That's probably one of the easiest ways to stay up to date. And I always love to feel connected or be connected. And maybe someday I make it out to India
Yes,
and
yes.
yeah.
Look forward to it. Sonali.
Thank you. On behalf of the team at the Ashang Desai Center for Leadership and Organizational Development at IIM Ahmedabad, I extend a very sincere gratitude towards Professor Niels, kindly accepting our invite and sharing with us so many thoughts, so many questions that all of us keep pondering. And also, this was a one-of-a-kind research seminar that was Q&A based, without a particular paper presentation, without a particular research, but a lot of thoughts which provoke future research directions in leadership and AI and related fields for us. So thank you, sir. Thank you for accepting our invitation. Thank you for being very kind to us throughout the process. I also thank the Zoom team for making the session seamless. I thank the audience and everybody for attending this today with us. I'm sure everybody is taking back with them some thought, some food for thought. And I lastly mention to all of you that at Kashang Desai Center for Leadership and Organizational Development, we're dedicated to curating such talks and other events, and I request all of you to join us in future as well for this. Thank you very much.
Thank you.